This is the part 2 video for Module 10, and I am going to go into a few more topics that the church talks about that are kind of moral issues, controversial issues. So the first one deals with capital punishment. The church is against capital punishment. There are some rare exceptions to this, where the church would say that if it's in the best interest of the common good and the safety of the people, then it would be acceptable. And this would be in a case where maybe there's not a jail system that is secure enough to keep a prisoner inside, and therefore the people who live in the surrounding area might be at risk. But the U.S. Catholic bishops wrote a pastoral letter that's called The Culture of Life and the Penalty of Death. And in that, they basically point out that in the U.S., there aren't instances where this would apply, where we have very good high maximum security prisons, and therefore it should not be applicable here in the U.S. As far as capital punishment goes, we also point out some of the kind of faults in the arguments for capital punishment. So first of all, people often talk about it as a deterrent, meaning that it will keep other people from committing a similar crime if the punishment is severe. And there's no actual statistical proof of that being true. In some states, there's actually an increase in the crime rate when someone is executed. People also often argue that it's cheaper to execute someone than to keep them in prison. That's not actually true. It actually costs more money. To execute someone costs more money because of all the appeals processes and all the staff involved in an execution. Another reason that we would point out capital punishment is wrong is because there have been at least 140 cases of people who have been found innocent later, like DNA evidence has proven that they were innocent and they shouldn't have been found guilty in the first place. In a few of those cases, those people were already killed by the time they discovered this new evidence. Another argument that we would point out is that capital punishment is discriminatory against the poor. Most of the people who are on death row are people who couldn't afford their own attorney, and therefore they weren't well represented. And then finally, there certainly is evidence to prove that there is racism when it comes to capital punishment. One of those proofs is that if you kill someone who is Caucasian, you're much more likely to end up on death row versus killing someone of color. The next topic I want to talk about is stem cell research. This is something that I just point out because I think people have kind of a misguided idea of what the church teaches about it. The church is not against stem cell research. It is against embryonic stem cell research, and those are kind of two different things. There is adult stem cell research that is happening, and it has been helpful, and again, the church isn't against that. But it seems as though embryonic stem cell research has been the most helpful, mostly because the stem cells from an embryo are less differentiated and therefore maybe more useful in different areas of the body. But again, the church is against that form of stem cell research. Most of the cells that are used in embryonic stem cell research come from embryos that were intended for in vitro fertilization. And the church is against like creating a child just for the purpose of disposing of that child. And because we believe life begins at conception, this would be seen as immoral. Also, the topic of euthanasia or doctor-assisted suicide is kind of a bigger topic. The right to die has become kind of a political topic, and there have been several states that have voted to give someone the right to die. We make the distinction between direct or active euthanasia and passive euthanasia. Direct or active euthanasia would be directly killing a person because we believe either they're elderly and therefore not valuable to society, or maybe it's because they have a terminal illness with no end in sight and we don't want them to have to suffer. The church is against this, sees it as very immoral and also short-sighted because it's only thinking about the suffering that we endure in this life versus eternal life, and we believe that it's God's place to decide when a person dies and not humans. Passive euthanasia, on the other hand, would be instances where someone is being kept alive on life support machinery, and when you turn that off, they die naturally. You don't go and kill them. And that would be a little different. Sometimes passive euthanasia can still be immoral, but sometimes it can be acceptable. We do say about end-of-life decisions that we're required to provide someone with what we call ordinary means. This would be nutrition, hydration, cleanliness, and warmth. Those 4 things. We are not required to provide someone with extraordinary means, which would be like a ventilator that's working their lungs for them. We don't have to do that. It's certainly not immoral to do that, but we have it as a personal choice. Kind of a specific scenario might be with brain death, and this is when there's no brain activity anymore. And of course, in these cases, again, we need to provide nutrition, hydration, cleanliness, and warmth, but it is morally acceptable if someone is brain dead to turn off the machinery that's keeping their heart beating, their brain working, and then let them die naturally. The last thing I wanted to mention was about suicide. Again, I bring this up because I want to make sure that you understand what the church today says versus what the church in the past said. So suicide used to be something that was treated as the greatest or one of the greatest mortal sins, mostly because it's a great act of not having any faith or rejecting God and the gift of life. And as a result, in the past, people were not allowed a Catholic funeral and they weren't allowed to be buried in a Catholic cemetery. Today, that's not true. Today, we understand, we have a better understanding of mental illness. We understand that it's often true that a person might not be of sound mind when they make this decision. And so we try to remove all the blame and all the shame that may be associated with that. And we try to minister to the families. We try to minister to people that we think might be contemplating suicide as well. I'm not saying that it can't be immoral, because it certainly can. It's just oftentimes we have no idea of the person's state of mind. So I wanted you to know that that old teaching is no longer true. All right, have a great day.